So it's a couple weeks later, working on getting the front suspension set up. I've got my Viking C209 coilover. I think it's for like a GMA body on the rear or something. But we've converted that to actually converted it to a stud mount to go into the factory Mopar shock mount, which they actually sell a conversion stud for the top to do that. So got that in there, kind of working on getting stuff mocked up. I had to clearance my mount there, which I'm going to weld some reinforcement in. But the big news, or big part of this, is that I've got the front bar pretty much mocked up and ready to go. Got, basically it's notched for the frame rail here, and then notched up here to, or the shock mount is notched to be able to accommodate the tube, and then we'll weld up here and behind there, and then that goes all the way through to our A-pillar bar on our roll cage. So yeah, it turned out pretty nice. Got a 1 5/8 or 1 3/4 hole saw. Just put a hole there, and seems like it's going to work okay. I'm going to work with the stock upper control arms. Those are currently curing on the back of my pickup right now. Just painted them. Got a couple of bushings to put in there and ball joints, and pretty much this front suspension will be wrapped up. So got to tack weld this, and then gotta grind it, fully weld it, and then yeah, be pretty much ready to go. And if you're wondering kind of how I did this, I'm actually kind of winging this, so as if I'm not winging everything else on this project. But that's what I did. I've got a hole drilled up there. Oops. Oh man, that light is bad. Got a hole drilled up here with a string going through it, if you can even see it. And basically I just copied what I did on the other side, because there was already a hole there, and I kind of started drilling a couple of pilot holes, running this string through to the A-pillar bar. So what I've got is basically a straight line, a string line for my center line of my pipe, and that coupled with this template here. As long as you put the string in the middle of the template, and then hold it up, and as long as that string is not touching any side of this hole, means it's straight. And then you just kind of place your front end over here and just determine your length, how long you want it. And if you got to move the hole, typically, or what I did, I just drilled next to my hole, depending on which way I had to move it, basically in a small enough radius around this hole that whatever hole I drill with the hole saw, it would cover all the rest of them and just take them all out. So you end up with one hole. So that's kind of how I'm doing this. Still have this whole side to do, but the other side is pretty much ready to go. So that's the front suspension update. Let's move on to the next project. Front suspension update 2. Front suspension's done. I actually took this a step further, and while I was putting the front bars in, decided to go ahead and put the heater in. So I've actually got the heater box in, and I went and drilled holes in the back of the vents, so that actually accommodates the front bars in both of the factory, what you would technically consider AC vents. They're really just fresh air vents that siphon air off of the cowl and funnel it into the cab. But we'll have heat and have the defrost hooked up. I was on the fence about putting heat back in it, but it is nice to have, especially if you're trying to cool down a hot engine. And the defrost is definitely nice for these drag and drive events. So got the heater put back in, and the front suspension is wrapped up and done. So let's move on to the next project. Headers are in. Got all the headers done. I'm working on getting dry sump lines rerouted right now, and then the tank mounted. The dry sump tank mounts are in. The keen eye will notice that I accidentally captured my wires in here, which they don't have to come out of there, so I guess it's whatever. But also got so the dry sump tank will mount there, so that's ready to go. The pump is mounted, and I made this spacer to actually space it off the motor plate. I had to make a bigger spacer, basically a bigger footprint spacer, because if you'll notice on the dyno video, the pump was actually moving around quite a bit at wide open throttle. Because we were using a couple of these spacers that didn't really have a whole lot of area around the top and the bottom, so that's got a much larger footprint to try and keep the pump stable. Got all of the dry sump lines rerouted. The steering shaft will actually go right in there. I'm going to work on that here tomorrow, and that'll come up in front of the header here, and then kind of up the fender and over to my column there. So lots of progress going on. Also picked up the drive shaft today from Carolina Driveline. The guys are super nice down there. Got me this drive shaft in like 2 days. So I'm gonna throw that in quick, and got 1350 U-joints on either end. I actually changed, see there's the old 7260 small Mopar yoke there. I changed that on the pinion of the 8 3/4 that's in here, so it accepts a 1350 Spicer U-joint now. So hopefully eliminated most of the weak links in the driveline. So I'm going to put this in, and we will get to working on the steering shaft. So the problem I'm running into with my steering column, using the stock steering column out of the car, actually it's still ironically an automatic column. And it's been in a stick shift car for a while now. But that's not the problem. The problem is, so I've taken and cut all this is the steering shaft that would go to the steering box, and it's only supported at the steering box and at the steering wheel end. So once you cut the steering shaft off to try and weld a U-joint on it or whatever, you got all this play. Basically the steering shaft is not supported inside of the steering column, and then they've got this weird intermediate sleeve in there. I'm not really sure what that's doing, but that's kind of floating around in there too. So I need to support the steering shaft inside the column to actually get it to stabilize itself and be stiff enough to be able to support twisting load and a couple other things. So working on trying to find, originally I was looking at a bearing. I've got a roller bearing to go in there, and it doesn't actually fit this shaft. It's actually a really tight, it's a really narrow bearing. It's a 1-inch shaft, and then a 1 inch or 1.5 inch opening in this intermediate tube, which is actually a really hard bearing to find if you're looking. I didn't actually find that one that works, but what I did find, I've got it's a poly bushing. It's actually for it's like a leaf spring shackle bushing. I ended up getting from Barnes 4-wheel drive, but I whittled that down a little bit, kind of shaved it peeled it like a potato. But I got that to fit over the shaft and into my intermediate tube. So that will work. I'll just grease that up. That should be adequate for that. And this actually was already in the other, well, not the other steering column, this steering column. And when I cut it all apart, it actually fell out. I ended up not cutting it, thankfully. But that fits in between this intermediate tube and just the regular steering column housing. So that solves that problem. And then I'll put those bushings in there and then weld this little retainer plate on there. I think it's actually a shim for a pinion on a 4 to 9 inch or something. Got our bushing in there, and then there's that plastic piece that's inside this tube. So I just took a washer, tack welded it on there to keep it as a retainer, and then finished it off with a Borgeson U-joint. Got this off of Summit. It's a 1-inch straight shaft to a 3/4 inch double D steering shaft, and that's how you turn a stock Mopar steering column into something that you can actually use with a rack and pinion. So we're going to put it in the car now. Got a U-joint back there, small shaft up to a heim joint. Another U-joint, small shaft, heim joint, U-joint, longer shaft. And if you can see down there, another U-joint on the rack and pinion. But not all of that matters, because we do have, well, actually you can't even see it up there. Oh, shoot. Functional steering. Biggest problem, a little bit of misplanning on my part. Using the stock brakes, I actually flipped the spindles, had to flip the spindles side to side. So the driver's side spindle is now on the passenger side, and the passenger side is now on the driver's side, which moves the brakes to the back so you can put the steering rack on in the front. But these brakes, since they're, vintage 1973 Chrysler, are freaking huge, and they actually do bump into the coilover back here, but still get 3 turns lock to lock before they bump the coilovers, so we're just going to live with it for now. I'm probably going to put some smaller brakes on it here eventually, but that's not something that's super pressing at the moment. So moving on, actually got to weld those heim joints fully now, but for all intents and purposes, that steering shaft is done, thankfully. So now I can actually steer the car, can actually put wheels on it and move it around the garage if I have to. So next we are on to, well, everything else. All right, so midweek update. It is 10 o'clock on a Thursday night, somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks from drag week. Got all the interior put back in, except for working on, had to cut a hole so we can get our tool in to adjust the clutch. So I gotta make a little trap door for that, but then I'll fold the carpet back over and zip tie up all the wires and that will be done. Shifter has to go on yet. I got to order that. But otherwise, interior is wrapped up. Moving on to working on right now. Ooh, get after it. Working on right now. If you can hear that in the background, somebody just took off with a motorcycle or something. Working on getting the dry sump lines all hooked up, kind of using some lines and fittings that I had laying around, scavenging those, and then hooking up getting our oil filter adapter hooked up. I'm trying to make it as compact as possible, so there's taking a lot of time to design just how this is all routed. But one thing I'm not doing, I'm not putting an oil cooler in it. Typically you put like an oil cooler and kind of lower on the radiator there, and like a circle track application, or a real, well, I shouldn't say real racing, but something that's going to see a lot of horsepower for a long time. You're going to heat up your oil fairly significantly. And I'm not really concerned about that with this setup. Actually, on the dyno, we had trouble keeping it at like 190. And that had no oil cooler. No airflow. I mean, and we had to actually keep wrapping the throttle up to actually put temperature in the oil. So I'm not too worried about that. And I confirmed a guy that I follow on one of the forums I'm on. He actually had trouble keeping his oil temperature up past 200 degrees. So not too concerned about that. We'll monitor it with an infrared temp gun throughout drag week, but that's kind of where that's at. I got exhaust parts. Exhaust will be going on here this weekend, but really starting to hit the home stretch here. Just carb and throttle linkage there, and then once the dry sump lines are on, once the carb is on and the dry sump lines are on, this thing is ready to start. Well, minus that upper radiator hose there. But yeah, so we're nearing the home stretch. Got a little bit of wiring left to do, but not much. I gotta go get the hood this weekend. You guys are gonna see that in a minute, probably. I hate the hood, but it's just bear with me. That's all I'm gonna say. Otherwise, yeah, list is starting to get a lot of stuff scratched off. Trailer hitch. Trailer hitch is one that I'm gonna have to probably build. So that's gonna take just a little bit more time. But most of the stuff is just little stuff. Bleeding brakes, bleeding clutch, all that stuff. So let's get to putting some lines on this dry sump. Here we go.